Hi, I'm Hannah. Welcome back to Savage Reads. I am here today with another book wrap-up as well as a knitting update. Now, I did make the blanket that I said I was going to make, but I used that thick chenille yarn and I hated every minute of it. That stuff is not fun to work with, and using knitting needles that are like so thick, it was a whole arm workout to be able to knit it. Finished with that at least. But I'm on to a new project, and my goal with the new project was I want to work with some fine yarn. Some yarn that is not giant and with smaller needles. And so I am working on knitting a shirt. It doesn't look like a shirt yet, but this is the neck. And I'm doing the increases into the shoulders right now, and then I'll start separating it out into a shirt body. So next knitting update, hopefully this looks more like a shirt than it does now, but I am loving working with a finer yarn than that really thick stuff, and I'm hoping that it turns out. I tend to like things better that I make for other people than what I make for myself, so I'm excited to see how this turns out. But so far, I'm kind of excited. It's supposed to be a very lightweight knit shirt, cotton yarn, a fine cotton yarn, so we'll see what happens with that. But that's my knitting update. Now we are on to the books that I have read. I have had a bit of a slower couple weeks in reading, and so these are just these 4 books that I've read in the past 2 weeks. So let's jump into the first one. So as a child, I loved the Redwall series by Brian Jacks, and I have such fond memories of picking up any and every book in that series that I could find at my school library and just tearing through them and really loving them. So I was excited. I thought, this will be the perfect one to read to my 8-year-old daughter. We are going to just connect over this. It will be nostalgic. It will be fun. And honestly, I hated every second of reading this. We just read Redwall, and I'm not going to touch any of the other ones. This is a great example of a book that worked as a child, but as an adult, I hated every second of getting through this. First off, reading this out loud is a huge pain. I disliked every time I had to read a different character because Brian Jacks thinks it's a great idea to put everything in dialect. And not only is it almost impossible to read out loud, sometimes it feels racist or classist. Like, I don't feel like I can say that in good conscience. I don't feel like I can make that voice without feeling kind of bad about it coming out of my mouth. So I caught myself having to read some paragraph and then try to translate it into how I would say it and just move forward from there. It just felt kind of icky. And the biggest problem with this is that it is a typical fantasy book. And I realize that this is a problem with so many fantasy books, but this one is so prevalent. It's that everything is black and white. There is no shades of gray here. The mice are the good guys, the rats are the bad guys, and different woodland creatures fit into one category, good or bad. I mean, I know that it's rats and mice and not different peoples, but the stereotypes, the accents, all these different things just come across as incredibly racist. And the actions of the mice that to me seem not okay are skated over because they're the good guys. And so it's very black and white morality, but to the point where you feel like it's a little racist. And I understand that so many fantasy books have this. I mean, look at Lord of the Rings. All the orcs are an evil race of people. That's kind of icky. But for some reason, just the way that it is portrayed in this was particularly egregious. And I was not very happy with it. As a kid, I didn't pick up on that as much. My daughter wanted to get to the end because she needed to make sure that everyone was okay and they defeated Clooney the Scourge. And great, we finished it all. But I had a terrible reading experience with this book. So, let me know if you've read any books from childhood that just haven't held up very well. I am going to be avoiding these ones moving forward. Now, Scott at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot recommended the book The Vanishing Act of Esme Lennox by Maggie O'Farrell. And I just talked about Maggie O'Farrell in my video about authors that I love to read. And usually for me, Maggie O'Farrell is a really solid read, so I was excited to get to this book. The description of this book says, Iris Lockhart receives a stunning phone call. Her great aunt Esme, whom she never knew existed, is being released from Caldstone Hospital, where she has been locked away for over 60 years. And so this is following Iris's story of getting to know this aunt, and also Esme's story of being locked up in an asylum for dubious reasons, as well as her sister, who wasn't locked up, but is now old and suffering from dementia. And so we're getting these multiple perspectives, trying to build the story of what actually happened and why was Esme in this hospital for so long, and what, if anything, is actually wrong with her. And so I like the idea of it. I think it's very interesting. I think there is a lot to be said for talking about Victorian age asylums and the problems and the abuses there. But for me, this book just didn't work. I think some of my problems with it were because it had such unreliable narrators. We have Esme, who we aren't sure if she has some problems or if she's perfectly sane, and we don't know what is going on, but we get things from her perspective, as well as her sister, who is kind of coming in and out of really knowing what's happening, and we get some of her memories mixed in. And then we also have the present day with Iris, who doesn't know what happened. I just feel like while that can be a really effective device sometimes, in this instance, it just left me a little confused and trying to pick up the pieces too much. And then by the end, when it all came together and finally I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it, I hated where it ended. I didn't love where it left off, and it just left me hanging on so many different threads that I didn't really love it. It felt like the author was just picking up plot points, trying to juggle them, and watching them all fall down. They just did not work, and I was kind of disappointed because I thought the writing was nice and I like the entire idea behind it, but so many different things, from Iris and her relationships and her current life to the relationship between the sisters, it just never felt like it was explored enough and kind of just left me wondering what happened. So honestly, I just didn't love this one, which is a shame because I think generally Maggie O'Farrell is a really good author, but this one just didn't live up to what I would expect from her. Now, Caitlin at Bandy's Books recommended the book Trail of the Lost, The Relentless Search to Bring Home the Missing Hikers of the Pacific Crest Trail by Andrea Lankford. Now, Andrea Lankford was a park ranger with the National Park Service's law enforcement team, and so she's been involved in finding missing hikers, and she is following a few cases and the people she teamed up with to try to find these hikers that were missing for long periods of time and presumed dead, but just didn't have enough evidence. And it gives you some really interesting history about the Pacific Coast Trail and the statistics of lost hikers. It's so interesting to go into some of the methods that are used to try to find missing people. And overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was really well done. It made me very nervous about hiking in general, just how easy it is to get into a dangerous situation and how much you definitely should be with someone else, because with solo hiking, one mistake and you could be dead. And so that was very eye-opening and made me a little nervous, but I thought that the story to find these missing hikers was very interesting. Part of the book did feel a little bit odd to me, but I don't think I can really fault it, so I don't know how to feel about it. It was that she gave a lot of time talking about how they tried to pair up with psychics and con men trying to find these missing hikers. And while I understand that that happened, it felt weird that they gave so much time and attention. And I think that it's definitely worth discussing because I do feel like con people are looking for desperate marks like mothers of missing children to make some quick money. I understand that, but the amount of time that was used talking about these kind of detracted from the important parts of the story and how they were actually found. I don't know. There was just like a little something in there that was slightly off. But overall, this book was fascinating. Like, highly recommend, but I'm hesitant to say 5 out of 5 stars. It's like 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was really good. There were just a couple things that were a little bit off and a little bit of a sideline story versus what was actually going on in the efforts to find these hikers. But I really enjoyed it. And if you like hiking and if you want to know more about this, definitely pick it up. It was really good. Now, I had a subscriber recommend the book Into Siberia, George Kennan's Epic Journey Through the Brutal Frozen Heart of Russia by Gregory J. Wallens. George Kennan had a pretty typical 19th century mindset, a little bit of toxic masculinity where he felt like he had to prove himself that he was brave and that he wasn't scared of things. And he went out and did a bunch of exploration in Russia and tried to set up a telegraph line all through Russia, and he fell in love with Russia. He loved Russia, and he came back to the United States and was a huge proponent of Russia. And he would defend Russia and give these big talks and go on lectures, and people really looked to him as an expert in Russian life. And the exile system in Russia started to come under fire in the US, and George Kennan says, the exile system is way better than what we have going on in the US because the prisoners are able to have their families go with them. It's much more humane. And he is just this big defender of Russia. So as public perception is turning a little bit against the exile system, he says, I am going to go out to Russia and explore all these prisons in Siberia, and I'm going to write a series of articles, and everybody will understand why the exile system is so much better. And he gets permission from Russia to go out there, and as he goes out there, he realizes that it is awful. And these systems are just horrible for the women and children that follow their husbands and brothers, and for the prisoners themselves, and just the conditions are so horrible. And what I really loved about this is not only is it going through George Kennan's life and what he wrote about, but I loved seeing the character development in this nonfiction book of George Kennan. He saw these abuses in this system, and instead of saying, well, I already staked my reputation on the fact that the exile system is a good thing, and so it's fine. I'm gonna go and keep writing the same thing. I'm doubling down on my beliefs. This is what it is. He saw new evidence and was able to say, this is wrong, and wrote a series of articles that talked about the horrors in the exile system and spent the rest of his life advocating for change and going out and really trying to help these people. And I thought that was so amazing and so refreshing to see someone who was willing to see the things that they had done wrong and make a real change. And I really liked that, and you could see that in other aspects of his life as well. So he never thought very much of women, and then he meets a woman in Russia who ends up being one of the leaders of the Russian Revolution. And after meeting her, his opinion on women changed. I think so often we see people from a couple hundred years ago and we say it's the time. They just didn't know any better. I loved that that's not the case. People can change and learn when they're presented with good evidence, and I loved that. Honestly, this book was a 5-star book for me. So incredibly fascinating. 5 stars. This was such a good read. I'm so glad I picked it up. That is what I have read the past couple weeks. So if you have any thoughts on these books, let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you all on the next one.